I was just gonna say, I think it was Michael Salomon that I saw tweeted it out either yesterday or today, and you can find him at Michael Salomon. But I think he tweeted something to the effect of, with all of these actions that we're taking against Russia, and I'm not trying to, and this stays on the point that we're on now, with all of the noise that's being made over Russia's supposed involvement and everything that the Obama administration is doing to go after them. If they really were interested in in going after the bad behavior or the games that were played behind the scenes, they'd be cleaning house at the Democratic Party. They'd be getting rid of all of the players that took part in taking the choice away from the voters and actually manipulating the results. And that's not being done. So I think that's very telling.
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
Well, the Russia thing is just part of this. I mean, let's be honest. For most people who are actually engaging with this Russia thing, and I don't say, and actually, you know what? Let me rephrase that. For people who are not actually engaging in this Russia thing, for people who are, sort of just skimming it and like repeating the narratives, it is simply a predicate to an argument that Hillary Clinton should have won the election. And that's why we have 50% of people, of Clinton voters out there, who think that Russia literally tampered with the vote count. Despite the fact that Keith Olbermann isn't going out there and saying, well, because Russia did this, Clinton lost. It's like this whole Russia thing is just the lead up to the conclusion that, well, Clinton really won, but there was this big, massive conspiracy, because otherwise, how could she have lost? And that's problematic. If we want to talk about Russia in this election, that is one thing, but the conversation still needs to understand that Clinton lost. Thing is that there's so much vague language being used. There's so much like lead up to the conclusion that, well, Clinton should have won anyway, and that it should really be Clinton going in office. That the Russia thing is only acting as another shield for the Democratic Party to not learn their lesson, and that's a problem. So whether or not we acknowledge that Russia played some part in this hack is a different question with whether or not Clinton should have won the election. And the answer to that question is no. And we need to have people who are promoting this Russian narrative come out and go, okay, yeah, Russia may have released information in a sort of strategic transparency. No one's saying they made it up. Maybe that's the case. I don't believe that to be the case. I mean, I have yet to see evidence of that to be the case. We have
yet to see evidence that Russia was involved in the leak. Yeah. Still, even that evidence they released, I read that report that it did not link it to a country. It was like generic. It was said 2 actors. This was access to. We don't know who or what, but these are typical attacks used by Russians. It's like, well, no, these are typical attacks used by anybody trying to break into a system. Sorry.
Yeah, but what this is on the part of the left, on the part of your Keith Olbermann, or your part of your Sean Kings, whoever is doing this. It's a very lazy, disingenuous type of journalism where they are leading you up to a conclusion and then pulling out last minute because to say the conclusion would be completely nonsense and ludicrous, but they want to lead you there. They want to hold your hand all the way up to the last part of the narrative, which is, well, Russia did all these things and then Donald Trump won, and he's maybe a Putin spy and he's friends with Putin, and a lot of his people got the Russian Star of Freedom, and I once saw him with a bear and he used a sickle at some point. And blah 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 blah. And before they get to that point where they go, that's why we should actually have Clinton as president, they pull away. But that's the argument you're making, and that's the argument that you're trying to make, and all you're doing is stripping out the last portion, and that makes you disingenuous. If you want to come out and say, well, if Sean King, instead of tweeting out 1,000 tweets regarding how, and I'm not meaning to pick on him, but he's in my feed about how these hacks prove that they did X, Y, and Z, then just say it. But the fact that you won't say what you want to say, which is that's why we need to appoint Clinton, or that's why Clinton should win, or that's why X, Y, and Z should have happened, then you become disingenuous. Then it's like, then what you're saying is inflammatory and basically nonsensical and would have you laughed out of all but the most conspiratorial circles, but that's the argument you're making. And to pull out last minute is just to be a coward. You don't want to co-sign your name to, well, Russia hacked the election and defrauded us of our quote unquote democracy. So I don't know what to say. I guess
it's people. Go ahead.
So here's what I'll say on this whole Russia thing. I think that this should not be about Russia, and it shouldn't be about the Democratic Party. Shouldn't be about Trump. It really needs to be about who you're getting your information from and whether you're listening or thinking. In my mind, all of these people just going along with the talking point. It may have been Russia. Let me break away from that for a second. Russia may have swayed things that they didn't tamper with the vote. Use your head and think about how those damn numbers are even obtained. They didn't just go into a computer and type some numbers to change the count. They may have hacked something. They may have leaked something. Russians that aren't part of the Kremlin, that aren't directly tied to the government, may have been involved. I'm still waiting on proof of that to be able to say, okay, sure. But but even aside from the Russians, there's all this talk of all of these government agencies are saying it. Yeah, and they also said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. There was also our government behind things that ended up being false. That either they were wrong. And so my whole point there is that before you just say, well, they said it, so it must be true. No, use your head and ask questions.
No, people are going to ask.
That's the problem with an engaged populace. We're not asking questions.
People don't ask questions when people tell them what they want to hear. That's called being an enabler. That's called being an enabler. You don't ask questions when, and everyone, most people succumb to this fault. That if you tell me that you're on my side and that you support me and blah blah blah, I'm much less likely to ask you questions or challenge you. And at this point, the CIA, or at least the mainstream media, is simply enabling a Democratic Party in a lot of ways that is dangerous, because it's preventing, or whatever, post-mortem, for lack of a better word. Like that is what it is. It's just enabling. This Russian narrative is enabling people's entitlement complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's hard to roll upon somebody and tell them that the CIA is just not credible. Like when you try to tell somebody that institutions that are under the office of the president and toe the line are just not credible institutions, and you can just point to all the times they've lied on the record, and then 30 years later the documents come out and the truth was really something completely opposite of what was disseminated to the public at the time via leaks and via media sources that act as instruments for government propaganda. Like, when you try to go and tell somebody that, hey, look, just because the government says it doesn't mean it's true, like, it's really hard to get them to understand that they're being lied to understand that there's a reason why the government says what it does. And I hate to be one of those people that says government is the enemy. But in many instances, when it comes to disseminating information, they don't want you to really know what's going on. One of the ways that you maintain and control is you control the flow of information.